Welcome, everybody, to the next installment of Conversations with Kevin. I'm really thankful that the School of the Arts at Northern Kentucky University lets me do this stuff. And I have with me a friend who I haven't seen in probably about 30 years. Terry Bailey is with us. He goes by, actually, he's the artist now known as Terrel, and he's a photographer who's based out of Denver, Colorado, and shows at several different galleries there. One of them being, is it Gallery 1505? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. They
Mhm.
also go by the Colorado Art Museum
Okay.
as well. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good to have you with us, Terry or Terrell. I'll try to use both of those names. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here as well. It's good to see you, Kevin. Thank you for having me. I really
Yeah.
appreciate this from your school, Northern Kentucky, as well as you inviting me. So looking forward to
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. So let's start. This is a question I always love to ask everybody is how did you become interested in art and photography for your career?
Yeah, well, so number one, photography is not my primary source of income. So it's more of a secondary thing and a nature of love. So, but my journey into art is kind of like a two-way path. It really started with music. I played piano from the time I was 5 or 6 years old. I think I took lessons all through high school. I stopped for a while because it wasn't cool in the 80s. You either had to play guitar or drums. So I stopped playing piano. Then I got back into it in college, and I told this guy that was teaching me. I said I want to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and I got to the point where I could play it without looking at the sheet music, and then I got to the point where I could play with my eyes closed. And I'd never realized the impact that art could have until that moment. I actually started crying at the end, and that had never happened to me. I'd never realized art could impact me in such a way, and so that was kind of my first real experience getting to realize the power of art. As far as visual arts and photography, that started about 9 or 10 years ago, I think. I was adopted when I was 2 years old, and I found my birth mother after my parents had passed away, and I was going up to see her in Kalispell, Montana. Um, and on the way, I stopped in Yellowstone. Yellowstone National Park is one of the parks that my parents my adopted parents would take me um, on these vacations out west, and Yellowstone was one of my favorite trips. And so it was almost my way of paying homage to them since they both passed. On my way to go start a relationship, I guess, with my birth mother. And on the way, I was taking all these pictures with my cell phone, and I was like, these are really good pictures. I thought they were. So I decided to reward myself with a camera, and I started taking pictures. I'm also a recovering alcoholic. It's hard to talk about my art without talking about my journey into alcoholism and then out of it. So as a recovering alcoholic or an alcoholic or an addict, we've got brains that obsess about things. And so when I got into taking pictures with a real camera, I just obsessed about photography and how to become the best photographer I could. And I spent the next 2 years obsessing about it. And people said, you should try to get into these art galleries because you're better than a lot of their work.
Yeah.
Early on, they were saying that, and I was like, eh. Um, but I did, and as I got into more, juried shows and then accepted into galleries altogether, I began to branch out and get to see all kinds of different pieces of art and listen to a lot of artist talks and things like that. And even if they weren't uh, photographers, I love to hear about their process and their way of thinking and how they're expressing themselves in their work and see if maybe I can't incorporate that into my own photography. So that's kind of the path in a long-winded way.
Not long-winded at all. We all have different paths that we're on, and I'm just really grateful that you're able to tell us about that story. And I think that there's a vulnerability there, but I think there's also a strength there that I just applaud you for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you.
Um, so it seemed like nature was part of the inspiration in terms of your photography. What were some of your artistic inspirations? I guess you've also mentioned music in terms of Beethoven, but are there some artist talks that you went to that really got you even more fired up or inspired you to make art?
Yeah, I don't know that any of those artist talks have really taken me to another level, but there's certainly been artists. I mean, JMW Turner is the way that dude painted light. Like I've never seen anybody capture light the way he did. And
Uh-huh.
I'm just so in awe of that. And man, if I could do that with a camera, I would be so happy. So I absolutely adore his work. I love the Impressionist painters. I love Rothko. I love there's a peacefulness to his work in the way that he uses gradients to just switch from colors. I love Clifford Still. I think he was a really interesting um, he had a really interesting career path that, you know, I probably know more so about him because his museum is here in Denver. So I've gone there a couple times. So I know his work, but I also really appreciate his work. It's very stark in contrast, and I like that about his work. There are photographers. There's a guy by the name of Guy Tall. It's Guytal, and he writes. He's a writer as well as a photographer, and he writes about philosophy. He writes about the philosophy of art. He writes about photography as an art form, you know, and he's very open about saying, you know, as a photographer, if you want to be a truly expressive artistic photographer, don't just go take documentary photos. You know, put yourself in that as well. And so I'm a big time Guy Tall disciple. Some of the photographers I absolutely love are Sebastião Salgado, who is a Brazilian photographer. Um,
Hmm.
there's a documentary about him. Sometimes it rolls around on Amazon Prime. It's called Salt of the Earth, and if you learn the history of him, it's fascinating. He was a humanitarian photographer and took very beautiful pictures of some very grotesque conditions, and some people have criticized him about it. But he got so sick of seeing the way humans treated one another that he decided he was going to learn how to be a landscape photographer and go as far away from humanity as possible. And he spent the next 7 years doing his latest work, which is Genesis. But unbelievable photographer. I adore his work. Black and white, mostly film. He's migrated to digital these days. There's another guy by the name of Nick Brandt, who is a wildlife photographer in Africa and also a big conservationist. He set up a couple charities to help to protect some of the grasslands and things like that. Another black and white photographer, film. He used a Pentax 67, which is one of the classic medium format cameras, and a 50 millimeter base lens. And so he to take pictures of elephants with a 50 millimeter, you really got to kind of get close to him. So he was using a remote to not wind up killed. To take pictures of the hippos and the elephants, but man, that guy's pictures are fantastic, and he's now photographing a lot of people that live in some of the villages that are being impacted by climate change, and you know, farmers or perhaps people that are relying on the tourism and things like that. The tourism just isn't there. So he takes really interesting stuff. Mark Klett is one of my favorites. Elliot Porter is probably the biggest impact on me. He was one of the first landscape photographers to really embrace color printing. But he also photographs what I've heard referred to as intimate landscapes. They're not the grand scenes that, you know, you see of Mesa Arch in Canyonlands National Park, but they're very small scenes of maybe just a couple of trees and just the form and the relationship of those subjects. is what really makes the picture. And he's probably had the biggest impact on me.
Okay.
I also love Bertinsky, Edward Bertinsky, a Canadian guy, um, who takes pictures of the ways that we impact the earth. Um, but he has an innate ability in composing the picture to make a very chaotic scene feel calming. And I've not seen many photographers have that ability. So I love his work for that ability. And
I'm gonna have to get on my photo game, and obviously the cat wants to get involved
yeah,
in it.
hey, kitty,
But
kitty.
yeah, but I loved what you were saying about Turner. It was just his birthday 2 days ago, and um so I put a quote of the day on the board of his.
Okay.
And it seems like a lot of the photographers that you're interested in also are really interested in trying to do something for the world. And I just want to show everybody this is one of your projects, Opportunity Cost. And
Yeah.
in this and I know that you've said that you really like to take black and white photographs, but
Mhm.
could you talk a little bit about this photo project that you did about Bear's Ear and
Mhm.
Monument? And I was just when I read your book and this project, I was like super proud of you and also just like,
Thank you.
wow, here's somebody who's taking his skill and trying to say something and save these important places. Could you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, I'd love to. You know, as I said, when I first got into photography, I really obsessed about, and I did a couple of portfolio reviews, and um, I think in all of them, I was basically told, don't just go out and take random photos, but do photography projects. And it was some of the best advice I ever got, because I think more deeply about how to represent things photographically, because I'm trying to tell a story and I'm trying to figure out how can I advance the story based on what we've got. So Bears Ears National Monument was created as a national monument by President Obama at the end of his administration. And then I think a year or two into the first Trump administration, he reduced it in size by 85%. So it was 1.3 million acres, reduced to I think it was point four, 0.5 acres, after it was resized. President Biden then restored it to the initial size, and I'm fairly certain we will see it again reduced in size. But the project itself was, I wanted to take pictures of, the book is called Opportunity Cost. I wanted to take pictures of the places that were no longer covered by national monument protections. There's a lot of oil and gas in certain areas of Bears Ears National Monument. There's also a lot of uranium, and so companies behind those uh, mining want access to that land, and so there are other protections there, such as scientific research areas, but those are much shorter term protections. And once those expire, it will be likely that those companies will have at it. So, anyways, that project was really just taking pictures of different landscape areas that I thought we might lose because of the loss of national monument status for some of those areas. So I had to do a lot of research. What's now included in the national monument, what's not included in the national monument, and and just the history of that place. You know, this is something I knew nothing about. I really didn't have a passion about it until I went there. And I know you Kevin have been artist in resident at some of the best places that we have in this country, you know, from a landscape perspective. There's something about Bears National Monument that just resonates with my spirit, you know, and I'm hopeful that you've had that experience too, because there's nothing better than that. And so um, I really fell in love with the place, and I try to get back there if I can, you know, once a year if possible. Um, but there's just it, it there's they, five bands or Native American nations came together in order to say these areas should be protected. And to get five nations of Native Americans to agree on things, especially nations that all kind of fought each other back in the day, is like next to impossible. So for them to come together and agree that these are the areas that are most important is in itself a pretty monumental thing. Um, it's also one of the few places, as of right now, that is jointly managed by both the Bureau of Land, BLM, as well as this group of five Native American nations, which are the Hopi, the Zuni, the Ute Mountain Ute, and the Navajo. They all have historical ties to that place. And it's often called the world's largest outdoor museum because of all of the uh, we call them ruins, but it's kind of a not a good term, and I can't remember what the term is. But I mean, some of those buildings were built 1,000 years ago and are in better shape than my house, which was built 100 years ago, might be embarrassing on my point, but it's just an incredible place, and the history there is fascinating. And so, yeah, I fell in love and wanted to do anything I could to kind of try to bring attention to the fact that this land might turn into a bunch of wells or mining pits.
Well, thank you. And I think that the world thanks you for that project. So thanks for stepping up and using your artwork and your art, your vision to bring light to that.
Mhm.
Do you have some quotes that inspire you or words that you try to live by?
Yeah, I mean, as an alcoholic, there's the Serenity Prayer, right? And the Serenity Prayer, those of us who are recovering alcoholics often say that people who aren't alcoholics, if they would go through the 12 steps, would probably become much better human beings, because it's really got nothing to do with drinking and just of being not being a selfish person anymore. But the serenity prayers is all about, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's really about knowing I can't control any of this. I can't control if Bears Ear shrinks by 85% again, so I'm not going to fret about it. I can control this. I might be able to do another photo project to bring it to light or something like that, but to know what the difference is. So that's really something. It doesn't have anything to do with art, but really more of a life thing.
Hmm?
From an artistic standpoint, Ansel Adams famously said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said the most important aspect of a photograph is the 12 inches behind the viewfinder. And he's really saying that brain of the photographer is what really makes a big difference in an artistic photograph, more so than the light or what lens you use and things like that. So
Yeah, that's spot on. Like I'm sure, and I don't want any of the photography people that are listening to this, but I've been to enough photography artist talks where as soon as the artist is done talking or the photographer is done talking, somebody raises their hand and says, "Oh, what lens did you use and what aperture were you using for that?" And the people are like, "I don't know."
yeah,
Like they're in it, the photographer is in it and
yeah,
it's not they're not thinking about the tools because
right,
the tool is just the mode of conveyance because up here the brain is and the vision is the important thing.
right. It's like
Yeah.
asking you what paintbrush you use, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I got a bunch of them. I'm not sure which brush I used for this or
Right,
that. So yeah.
right.
Um, yeah. Oh, the cat wants to get in on this. She's
Come
got
on
some
in.
paint
Come on
quotes.
in.
Yeah, she likes the cat tongues brush. That's her favorite.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so what would you like people to know about you and your art?
You know, I had a really interesting. My first solo show was to display some of those Bears Ears National Monument images, and the artist that owned the gallery, we were talking, and I asked her what she loved about painting. She was an abstract painter, and she told me, and I don't remember what she said, but then she said, "What do you love about photography?" And I had to think about it. And I said, I don't. I don't love photography. I love nature. I love being in nature, and I happen to have a camera with me. I've grown to love photography more. I think it's very, very challenging to get a composition that really works. And I find that to be a great challenge and a lot of fun just to do that. But so I've really got two goals when it comes to my photography. The first goal and the most important is I'd really love to inspire people to better take care of our natural lands, right? Um, my life has been enriched. I can't even tell you how much more my life has been enriched by the moments I've spent out in nature, oftentimes by myself with nothing but me and the wind and the trees, you know. I've had some really, really incredible moments that I'll take to the grave, and I might not have even taken a picture of them, but they have just made my life so much better. Um, my soul gets recharged, you know, with all the craziness in the world today. I go a mile on a hike and I don't think about what's going on, you know, the political scene or any of that things. So I really want the future generations to be able to experience the things that I experience. And I understand things are a lot different today, and they may not they might not want to, the majority of them. They
Mhm.
might rather play on their phones or do whatever it is that kids do these days. But I at least want them to have the opportunity. And I'm afraid that they might not. So I try to I try to inspire people to take better care of our natural lands. And another thing I try to do is inspire people to slow down. You know, we talked about Elliot Porter a little bit in those intimate landscapes. You don't just walk through the woods and see all this stuff. You know, you have to go slow. You have to stop and look around. Sometimes you have to look up, and sometimes you have to look down, and sometimes you have to close your eyes and smell things, and that might prompt something. Um, so, so it's funny. I often get asked, "Hey, I'd love to go take pictures with you," and I typically I say no because I say either you're going to have to be one of the most patient people ever, because we might say we're going to try to get here and we won't get there because I'm just going too slow, or then I'll feel self-conscious and I'll just go fast and then I miss out on everything that I typically love about my walks. So
Mhm.
I'd love to inspire people to slow down and just look around. I mean, we're in such a fast-paced world. um, one of my favorite lines, and in fact, Guy Tall mentioned it when I did a photography workshop with him. But there's this line in um, Shawshank Redemption where the old guy gets out, you know, and he says, and he's walking down the street, and you know he hasn't been free for 50 years, and cars didn't exist when he went to prison. And he's like, "Hey, I got out, and everybody's in such a damn hurry," you know, and you know that was probably the truth in the 50s or 60s when that was supposed to take place. Imagine what it's like now. You know, everybody's in such a hurry, and I think we'd be a lot better off if we'd slow down and, as Ferris Bueller said, you know, look, stop and smell the roses.
Nice. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know if you can add much more to this because my next question would be like, could you describe the environment you like to work in? And it seems being out in nature is paramount to your creative process. But if you could talk about that, and then I know that I've uh, I've read that you have a sort of procedure that you go about after you've taken pictures where you might rank something a five, a four, or a three, and then you let it sit for a while. Could you
Yeah.
talk about both taking pictures outdoors because that's part of your
Mhm.
studio
Yeah.
practice, and then the practice that you incorporate when you bring those shots back into the onto the computer in the dark room.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I, you know, I don't appreciate, or I should say, I don't enjoy driving through, let's say, a national park, driving through Yosemite and stopping at all the stop off, the turnoffs, taking a picture and then moving on. I like hiking, I like getting away from people. The quieter it is, the typically the better my photographs are.
Hmm.
There are a couple things that I think you will often see in my pictures. There's a sense of peace and quiet and tranquility, and those are kind of scenes that I'm looking for. Um, and again, that goes back to my alcoholic life. My life is so much more peaceful now that I don't drink and I can remember what I did last night and stuff like that,
Hmm.
that I think that might be why I'm even more so drawn to these scenes of quiet solitude, peacefulness. So in order to find those spots, it's hard to find those spots when it's a place that's crowded with people. And so usually my hikes, they're a good distance in, and sometimes I'm wandering off the path a good bit to find a composition. Um, it's hard to find spots these days that haven't been overrun by people posting beautiful pictures to Instagram or Facebook, and then it becomes discovered, and everybody wants to go there now. I kind of try to avoid those places, what I call the cliche photographs. I've taken a few over the years, and they're probably my best selling ones. I hate
Yeah.
to say it, but people love them. It's a beautiful scene because it's a beautiful scene, but it really doesn't, it doesn't hit me in the heart the way that some of these other scenes do. Um, but so I'll go out and I'll take pictures, and I'll try to experiment, and I'll try to be expressive of what I was feeling at the moment. I'll try to compose things, and then when I get back onto my computer, I photograph with both film and digital, but almost all my hikes are with digital gear because it's so much lighter. If I could, I'd photograph with film because I think it's much more meditative process to photograph with film. But it's just so heavy, and as you know, I'm not a young chap anymore, so I'm trying to
Hmm.
lighten my load, and the wear and tear on my back. But when I get home, I will go through and I'll rate, a five, a four, a three. Um, if it doesn't even rate a three, then I probably get rid of it. A three is something that there might be some potential there, but I don't quite see it. Fours and fives are typically pretty good, but I like to give myself a couple of weeks at a minimum between the time that I took the photograph and the time I actually start working on it. Uh, because there's an emotional connection with the moment that might interfere with my ability to say this is a good picture. This is a picture worth moving forward with and editing. And so if I were to just come home, put everything on the computer and start editing my favorites, it might be very realistic that some of those favorites turn out to not be that good in the long run just because there was an emotional connection to that moment that it eases a bit if you give it a little bit of time. Um, but then, when I do decide, okay, I'm gonna move forward with this picture or this picture, um, Ansel Adams had this concept of pre-visualization, and a lot of photographers confuse the concept that Ansel had with this thinking of a picture in your head at home, and if you read the story of when Ansel came up with the concept of pre-visualization, he was out and he saw this scene and he envisioned in his head before he took the picture what he wanted the final print to look like. He didn't have this scene already in his head when he went out. Um, and so a lot of people say, photographers say, oh, you got to avoid pre-visualization because then you're closed off to other things. And if you go out with the concept of I'm going to take this picture, yes, they're very right. But that wasn't the concept that Ansel had. Ansel was thinking, this is what I want it to look like. And so he used different colored filters on that day. And when he got home and it was a couple days later when he developed the film, he found that the red filter was exactly what he envisioned in his head, and he went light bulb moment, And so there are moments when I have that pre-visualized image in my head before I press the shutter button. Sometimes I just make pictures of things that interest me. And when I start working on the computer, I might then get, okay, this is where this should go, And so um, I'm not a big Photoshop guy. I don't change skies out. What you see is what I saw for the most part, but I will use white balance and color temperature, and I will use contrast, and I will use the old school dodging and burning or darkening and lightening things so that your eye focuses on what I want your eye to focus in on. And hopefully you get an emotional reaction that I'm trying to convey. So
Mhm.
that's kind of my process.
Yeah. I like how Ansel Adams said like the photograph or when you take the picture, the negative is the score, and
Yeah.
then when you develop it, that is the performance.
Yep.
And it's interesting how when you do have that good capture, I guess I don't know if Ansel Adams would use the word capture now, but in today's day and age,
Yeah. It's
we're
fine. It's good.
capturing images, and then it's like, what are you gonna do with this now? Like
Yeah.
how can you tweak it and dodge and burn or change the contrast, whatever, and
Mhm.
make it a more interesting image.
Yeah, a lot of people never understand that. If I have a show in the gallery, they might say, "Did you Photoshop this?" Like Photoshop has become a verb for one thing, as opposed to a software package. But and they think it's uh, a cheating method. And it's like, if you had any idea how much Ansel did in the in the dark room, if you look at his most famous picture, Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, watch the contrast change over the years,
Yeah.
man. He
Yeah,
completely
uh-huh.
but he was a master printer, and people just don't understand that. I was talking with Tammy a little bit about Jerry Ullsman. He's also one of my favorite photographers.
Oh
He,
yeah? Yeah,
he's not
he was one of my colleagues, teachers.
okay.
My friend Barry Anderson, who taught photography here for years, his teacher was Jerry Usman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
his work is so incredible. And then when you consider he's doing multiple negatives on the enlarger, like he was doing Photoshop before Photoshop was even the idea of the people that created Photoshop.
Yeah.
And it's just such magnificent work, man. So yeah, but a lot of people think that, if you edit the stuff that, you're kind of cheating, and it's like, no, it's not the case at all, man. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, you have to make it speak. And sometimes like you have the raw stuff there, and
right.
you don't
Yeah.
need to add too much, but you need to figure out how to make that thing sing.
Yeah, and you'd be amazed at, how just five small changes can have such a huge impact. If you look at the change to change, you're like, oh, we're not really doing anything. But then you look the first change to the fifth, you're like, holy cow, okay.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
it's tugging at the heartstrings. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the Ansel Adams photograph you're talking about, like the
Hmm.
original, and then like you see it progress or evolve, and
Yeah.
then it's like, yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So you've talked a little bit about some of your favorite things, going hiking and music. Do you have
Mhm.
other favorite things, books or uh, movies, or are there some other things that you enjoy doing as well?
Yeah, like so, I still play piano a little bit, although I've gotten into guitar over the last couple of years. So I'm trying to learn how to make pretzel fingers with my fingers. And it's a lot harder in my 50s than it probably would have been had I started it in my teens. But I love playing guitar. I still love playing music. I make my own music, so I've got like a little electronic music studio downstairs. Um, I've got an old Rhodes piano that I absolutely adore. If it wasn't so heavy, it'd be one of the things I take out of my house if my house were to ever burn. but I broke my back getting it in my house, so it's probably just gonna have to go up in flames. But I've got that and a few synthesizers and a modular synthesizer that I put together. I soldered a bunch of the modules and some drum machines and samplers. So I love making music when I have some time. Favorite movies? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've got a bunch of them. I mean, Shawshank Redemption is obviously up there. Platoon is one of my all-time favorites. I love Man on Fire, where Denzel Washington is uh, a bodyguard for a little girl in Mexico City. I don't
Mm.
know if you ever saw it. And so she does get kidnapped, and he turns into the world's he turns into Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction, right?
Oh boy.
Without and he just it's his but the cinematography in that film, a lot of people hate it because it's very jerky, and so some people get motion sick from it, but I absolutely love the cinematography and the colors. Um, Wes Anderson actually does some really interesting cinematography and as well as writing. Most of the stuff I'm reading these days is stuff that isn't really fiction, so it's not all that interesting. There is if you're interested in Bears Ears National Monument, there's a writer, I think his name is Dave Roberts, maybe Dan Roberts. He passed away a couple years ago, but he wrote a lot about the Southwest and and the Bears Ears area in particular. And I think most people are aware of Edward Abbey, Desert Solitaire, which is kind of, if you're into the outdoors, you've probably read Desert Solitaire, and if you haven't read it, you probably should. Um,
I'll put that on the list.
he he's a pretty opinionated dude, you know. He's a bit cranky, but he's got some really interesting takes on how the land should be taken care of. And he also spent a good amount of time in the Bears Ears National Monument area, as well as the Southwest US, which I've fallen in love with the desert, man. It's just awesome.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's such a quiet place. Freaky at first, but once you get used to it, it's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah, let's take a look at a few of your photos. So we're talking the desert here. Can you see the image right now?
I can,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about taking this particular photo?
Yeah, this is in Bears Ears National Monument. This is a place called Valley of the Gods, which is the southernmost tip of Bears Ears National Monument. Um, for those of you that saw Forrest Gump, the place where Forrest Gump stops running is a place called Monument Valley, which is about 15 miles south of here. Um, and I just, these rocks during the day are gray and boring, and but when you get the right light right at sunrise or sunset, um they just glow orange, as sometimes red. And so you got this old pinyon tree, kind of framing along with that rock on the side, the golden butte there. And if I remember correctly, there were some people camping just up to my left. So I tend not to include man-made stuff in my pictures because I'm not really a big fan of humans, and the way we treat the environment. So um, most of what you'll see if you look at my photography is going to be strictly nature.
The light in this one is really spectacular.
Yeah,
I
thank
know
you.
that when Tammy and I were out there years ago, we showed up around probably noon to 2 o'clock. I don't know, but like
Yeah,
as you mentioned, the light was this overhead light, and it was just everything was just kind of drowned out. And I was taking all these photos, like, oh, I want this to really kind of talk to people's souls. But the thing
yeah,
that you have in this is you have the light. And
yeah,
and you have to be there at that particular special moment, that time of day where the raking light hits the rocks and just lights everything up. And those moments are so few and far between. And showing up at like noon is not the right time.
You know, and that light lasts so it just flies by, you know. Sometimes if you're not already there and ready and you get out and you set up your tripod and by the time you got to set up the lights changed and the magnificent light isn't there anymore, you're like, you know,
Mhm.
sad face.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but you know, this kind of speaks to what we were talking about, my process. I'm a big sunrise guy. And so, you know, most people say landscape photography, you got the hour before sunrise, the hour after sunrise, the hour before sunset, and the hour after sunset. Outside of that, the light stinks. And if you're taking these big pictures like this, it does. But if you're taking intimate stuff and you're in forests where the light isn't quite as important, you could still take a lot of really, really good pictures. But I've always loved sunrise more than sunset because most people are too lazy to get up that early. And everybody's up at sunset, you know, and they're out and about. And but so I'm often the only person out there at sunrise, and I absolutely love sunrise. And now I just wake up at 3 in the morning automatically because I've done it so long. But
And this one's a sunrise. Am I correct on that?
yeah, yeah, this is sunrise. Yep.
Yeah. So you work hard for your photos. You're up like you're up early in the morning. Do you camp at these locations ready for the sun to come up or
Sometimes I do. If I go to Bears Ears, that's too far for me to drive in a single day. So I will camp there. I'll be honest, the couple times I went for this particular project, I went for like a week on two occasions, and it was at Thanksgiving. And it's pretty cold. You know, number one, I've got a 50-year-old prostate, so I'm kind of up at different points of time during the night. But
Mhm.
it's kind of cold in the high desert in no, late November. So you're kind of just praying for the sun to come up. Like I'm ready for the day to start, man. I'm freezing.
hmm Yeah, this is an absolutely beautiful photograph.
Thank you.
And I think that it's part of the front cover of your book for opportunity cost. Is that correct?
This one, the front cover is actually like a panoramic, and so it kind of actually wraps around the book. So if you were to
Mhm.
open up the book and just lay it flat, you would see it. It might be backwards on the actual book. I can't remember. This one
Yeah,
might be
let's.
on the inside or something like that, though.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. First interview ever where you don't see the person's face and you just see the book.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. So it it didn't connect. It should connect on the side you open to the side, but yeah,
Mhm.
that's but it that picture was taken. The picture you just had up is taken in a similar spot in Bears Ears. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a very vertical image. Can you tell me what the inspiration for this was and how you're using the elements and principles of design, the line and the value to really make this a captivating image?
Yeah, there's a cool story behind this picture too. There's another photographer I absolutely adore. His name's Fan Ho, and he's a Chinese photographer. He did a lot of street stuff, I think in like the 50s and 60s, maybe a little later than that. But I absolutely love his work, and he does this style quite a bit actually. This really thin, tall. So I figured if Fan Ho could do it, I could pull it off without people yelling at me. But this is part of a project that I'm actually trying to put together a book this year for the 5 year anniversary of a fire that went through Rocky Mountain National Park called the East Troublesome Fire. And I spent a year photographing just the burn scar of the fire as they began to open up the park. They had it closed for safety reasons for a good amount of time, and so I would just focus on the areas that had already been opened. But one thing I noticed in exploring, you know, again, I'm always there at sunrise, is as the light starts to hit these. This is a pine tree. As the light starts to hit the pine trees, you'll see the branches all burned to within, you know, maybe 4 or 5 inches of the trunk, and the bark fell off of the branches, but the bark stayed on the actual tree trunk itself. and I was always amazed at the way the light reflected off the bare wood of the branches, but not the tree trunk. And so I'd always been looking for the right place to make this photo. And one time I found a huge forest of burned pine trees that had this. It was later in the day, and I was taking a picture of something else at the time, and I saw this guy with a monopod and a camera hanging over his shoulder, and he had the big long, high-end Canon lens hanging off it. And I thought, okay, this guy is not just somebody, for a stroll. And he walked past, and then I came upon this forest, and I'm looking through my camera with my 400 millimeter lens because I wanted to I wanted to really try to focus just on one tree, and um with a wider lens, you're just too much tree. And he saw me when he was coming back, and it was 10:30 in the morning. The light wasn't good, but he yelled from about 50 yards away, the light sucks right now, as if he's telling me how to take a picture. And I was, as you could probably imagine, quite offended. And I considered some pretty tasty retorts to potentially toss his way, but I kept to myself. And he came up and he said, unless you're looking for something more abstract, which, this is exactly what I was looking for. I didn't make this picture at that. I came back the next day and went to the same place when the light was just starting to hit, and I took the picture again. So it turns out this guy is actually a really well-known photographer in Estes Park, or Rocky Mountain National Park. He's got like 20 photo books of Rocky Mountain National Park. He's got a gallery in Estes Park, and he's actually a super nice guy. Once I got to talk to him, he's also uh, he and a few other photographers, I think all of them Colorado based, started this organization called Nature First, and it it has like 7 principles that it asks landscape photographers to follow. And they were all things I already did. If you find trash in the mountains or whatever in the parks, go ahead and pick it up and just carry it out. Just leave the place a better place than you found it. And so yeah, I've been a member since very early with them, and I got to talking to him. He's actually a super nice guy, but I was pretty upset with him. But this picture itself, um, I underexposed quite a bit because I really didn't want the background. In the background, and if you look hard enough, you can see there are other trees in the background, but I didn't want those. So I underexposed, and I actually did a lot more work in post-processing than I normally would in order to cover up the bright areas in the background, because I just wanted this one particular tree to stand out in the light on the branches of this one tree. But this is one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. Absolutely adore this. I don't understand why people don't buy it. So, but
Sometimes,
you probably run into that, right? Like, this
yeah,
is such a
yeah.
good painting. Why don't people buy it? You know?
Sometimes we have those favorites and nobody else seems to see what we see.
Yeah.
And like this is one of my favorites of yours that I'm gonna pull up here. And I think that I don't know. I don't know if people buy this photo of yours, but it's of a devastated forest fire. I think from um, Rocky Mountain National Park, which you were talking about. It's like I find just so much beauty in this, in that it reminds me of like nothing is forever, and like nature will eventually sort of come back, but you can just see how the fire impacted this, and like the visual rhythms, it feels like post-apocalyptic in a forest, which you don't see that very often, and that's what draws me to this photo.
Mm.
Um, you want to talk about this one? Yeah. All right. Well, it's good that I was able to paint the photograph of your own photograph in your mind. Um,
This is
yeah.
another one of my favorites,
Hmm.
So number one, I titled this Surrender, and the bending trees almost reminded me of a subject in front of a king that's bowing in reverence to the king and as a sign of humility. And um, there's a lot of different takes on climate change and whether it's human caused and things like that. I happen to think that we are contributing quite a bit to climate change, and it's almost as if the trees are bowing, saying, "Yeah, okay, we can't fight you anymore," which is sad to me. But this East Troublesome fire was a fascinating fire in that this happened in 2020, and Colorado's three largest fires in state history all happened in 2020. But prior to that, the largest fire was a fire called the Hayman Fire that happened in 2002. And the Hayman Fire was, I think, 90,000 uh, acres, which is a pretty sizable fire. This fire, the East Troublesome Fire, hit the town of Grand Lake, which I know, Kevin, you spent some time in Rocky Mountain National Park. I don't know if you spent any time on the west side or in Grand Lake, but this is on the west side. And the fire actually went through Grand Lake, um, burned a number of houses, killed an old couple that didn't heed the evacuation warnings. And right around the time it hit Grand Lake, 100-mile-an-hour winds started to blow the fire. And each national park has its own fire manager. And the person for Rocky Mountain National Park had been the fire manager for 20 years at the point of this fire. And what he thinks happened is that the winds were blowing so strong, the fire was moving so quickly that it warmed up the embers that give a tree its strength, and they bent, but the fire then moved so quickly that it became cold and they just kind of stuck there. And so I had seen, a lot of these trees in bent fashion, and I spent a long time looking for this scene, because I wanted something to capture the bending of the trees. And obviously there's a couple trees in here that broke. And this is kind of Bertinsky-esque in that it's a very chaotic scene, but I think the way that it's framed and the way that I was able to compose it, there's a bit of a calmingness to this picture. But this was a very interesting picture because most of my gallery shows I'll print up to 16 by 24, maybe I'll go 24 by 36. But this piece in particular has to be big. Like it just loses its impact. So, the first thing I do, another part of my process before I decide to sell any print is I print it either in small form or maybe even big form, and I either leave it on my kitchen table or I'll actually put it up on my wall, and I'll leave it for a month to see, do I still appreciate it and enjoy it as much a month later as I did at first. And that's why you don't see a whole lot of sunset stuff from me. Because I found that over the course of a month that it doesn't impact me the way it once did. Um, so this one I printed, 16 by 24, and I was like, doesn't even come close to having the gut punch that it needs to. Uh, I went up to 3 feet wide, and it still didn't have the impact. So this one I printed at 4 feet wide by, I think it's 2.5 feet high, and this is one of the bigger prints that I've actually had in a gallery. And but yeah, this one's a powerful one. I love this one. And I wanted the gut punch. Now, I do want to say something in response to uh nature recovering. And because the wind blew the fire so quickly in this particular case, it wasn't really regarded as an intense fire. Recovery from a wildfire has a lot to do with, number one, the drought that happens over the next couple of years, but also the intensity of the fire. And so the wind blew this stuff so quickly that it never really got intensified. But the truly intense fires will actually change the chemical composition of the soil so that the things that grew there might not even be able to grow again. And so it may completely alter the landscape. And uh, there's been some nice recovery in a lot of areas of this particular fire. Um, but there are still places that of parts of that Hayman fire from 2003 that are look like the moon. You know, just no recovery. There's some places in the Flat Tops Wilderness, one of my favorite places in Colorado, burned in 2002. Very little recovery. There's places in Yellowstone that burned in 98, I believe, that still there's just not much recovery. And so sometimes nature does bounce back and sometimes it doesn't, you know, and it can be sad, but in this particular case it did bounce back. And one thing I missed is, you know, those 100-mile-an-hour winds caused this fire to grow by 100,000 acres, or was it 90,000? Yeah, 100,000 acres over a 24-hour period of time. So the biggest fire in state history prior was 90,000 acres. This fire in a 24-hour period outgrew that 90,000 acre fire. So this one was a doozy, man.
Um, well, those are a few photos I wanted to share with our viewers, and man, they're all spectacular. I have in my living room. I have I have like a floodplain where there's all these trees, and it's the biggest painting I've made. It's 4 feet by 8 feet, and there's something about the repetition and the rhythm of
Mhm.
trees, and then when you make it big scale, I think it really has some power. It packs a
Yeah,
punch. Hmm.
yeah, that rhythm.
Yep. I want to give you a moment to if there's any teachers or mentors that you'd want to give a shout out to and thank. Love to hear some of the people that you want to talk about and who've maybe made some sort of impact on your life.
Yeah, you know, from a photography perspective, like I said, Guy Tall has been huge. Absolutely love his books. He's like such a philosopher too. Like he's just such a book geek that um there's also a guy by the name of Dave Dushman. He's a Canadian guy. He also writes a number of books. He started a YouTube channel way back in the day when I was learning how to take pictures, and he'd always end his YouTube videos by saying, uh, "Gear doesn't matter. It's more about the vision," you know, and that always really uh, that always really spoke to me. And so I took a couple of his online classes, and I think those have really gone a long way into learning better. There's another photographer whose work, um, he's probably a pretty under the gun person unless you're really into landscape photography. His name is Bruce Percy. He does a number of online courses as well, and I've taken a couple of them. His use of tones is like so quiet it's deafening, if that makes any sense. Like it's almost monochromatic, but then if you really look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like shouting, you know. I absolutely love the work of his tones, but he also does very minimal, almost Michael Kenna Hokkaido. They both gone to Hokkaido and photographed the trees in the snow. But I love Bruce Percy's work a lot better. But he also goes to these deserts in Brazil and to Iceland and goes to these very sparse landscapes and makes pictures, and unbelievable when he get, especially his minimal and abstract stuff is really inspiring stuff. Um, those are like the three people I think from a teaching perspective have really got me. One thing Dave Dushman preaches to his students is study the masters. and he says, and don't just study photographers, study all kinds of visual masters, visual artists. And I think one of the biggest ways I've improved is actually self-analyzing my own pictures, right? What if I would have taken 2 steps to the left? What if I had crouched down to the ground versus staying up? What if I changed the focal length and things like that? Um, when you analyze photos, you start to see what you like, and your voice starts to come out. But I don't think you can get to that point without being critical of yourself, you know. Um, and you've got to be able to say, I like this because of this, not just that looks cool. Like you got to say, I like this because this tree is about 3 feet from this tree, right? You get that rhythm. You have to be very specific, and you got to peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak. So, in a sense, I've been kind of a teacher to myself. Um, so hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it does. And I think we'll end with that. I want to thank you so much for the time and for teaching us a lot about photography and about your vision. So I'm super pleased to have talked with you. And I'm gonna turn off the interview part and I'm gonna talk to my friend Terry now for a second. So
Can, can
oh
Can I just shout out, because my
yeah.
stuff isn't under Terrell Bailey, it's
Oh
under
yeah, yeah.
Lifted
Go
Spirit
ahead.
Photos.
Sorry.
So my website for anybody that wants to check it out is liftedspiritphotos.com. I think I'm lifted_spirit_photos on Instagram. Um, and those are pretty much the best ways to look at my latest work and things like that. But so now you can
Yeah.
turn it off. Thank you.
Lifted spirit photo. Yes.
Yeah.
All
Thanks,
right.
Kevin. It's been great, man.
Yeah. Super great, Terry or Terrell or lifted spirit photo.
Yeah. Appreciate it, man.